I'd rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6 is one of the dumbest things that people say during conversations about self-defense. If you don't think about it too hard, it almost seems logical, and that's one of the reasons that things like this get repeated over and over again. But like most of these self-defense cliches, at best, it just means nothing. It's a nothing, inane cliche. But at worst, it's a dangerous mindset to have, and a very dangerous mindset to encourage others to have. There's a narrow set of circumstances where it applies, but that's not typically how it's used. Most of the time, when you hear a person say they'd rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6, they're saying it because they're an idiot. I know, I promise I'm not only making this video to start arguments. Mike, what are you talking about? Would you rather be carried by 6 than judged by 12? Well, no, if you told me those are the only two possible outcomes, I'd probably choose judged by 12, I think, most of the time. But those are not the only two possible outcomes in a self-defense situation. How about neither? That's an option. Most of the time, you could be neither judged by 12 nor carried by 6. You know what else is an option? Both. You could get both judged by 12 and carried by 6. That's the worst one, by the way. Like if you're not on board with anything else that I say here, that one we can all agree is the worst. The main way that people arrive at this mindset of rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6 is that it's largely out of their control. Like they don't have any control or influence over how this thing goes. And that typically comes from misconceptions about how complicated the laws are, or the belief that they vary widely from state to state or location to location. They're not, and they don't. But maybe you get where I'm going with this, and you understand, okay, that's an oversimplification. I understand that it goes deeper than that, but Mike, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not any kind of analyst, a subject matter expert, even remotely related to this, and it's just beyond me. Maybe you're smart enough to realize that you're not smart enough, and you just figure, well, if I'm not sure, I'll just cross that bridge when I come to it. Well, that's not really a great plan. It's not a plan, but you don't actually have to wait until something bad happens to you to do something about it. You can visit the sponsor of this video, the USCCA. The United States Concealed Carry Association helps responsible Americans like you prepare for what happens before, during, and after an act of lawful self-defense. USCCA members get life-saving education, expert training, plus self-defense liability insurance. These benefits provide more than 500,000 USCCA members with the peace of mind that they deserve. Plus, a USCCA membership is always risk-free with their 100% money-back bulletproof guarantee. Membership is truly an investment worth exploring. Click the link in the description below right now to activate your U.S. Concealed Carry Association membership. Click that link in the description below now. The USCCA is not an insurance company. A policy has been issued to the USCCA by Universal Fire and Casualty Insurance Company. That policy provides the association and its members with self-defense liability insurance subject to its terms, conditions, limitations, and exclusions. You guys that don't have any leg muscles. Anytime you're presented with two choices and both of them suck, you have been outsmarted and you are definitely not in control of the situation. This is me when I'm trying to get my 5-year-old to eat vegetables. I ask her, do you want broccoli or peas? It's the illusion of control. Do you know why this works on my 5-year-old? And she's satisfied with her decision? Because she's 5. You're not 5. It should not work on you. The decision-making process before, during, and after a self-defense incident is a pretty complex one with a lot of variables. Reducing it to an A or B sort of decision requires a lot less brain power, and people love to absolve themselves of responsibility by pretending that things are beyond their control. Right about now, there's a guy in the comment section sharing some story about a dude who totally did a self-defense, and he still got charged and maybe even convicted. Yeah, maybe, but that happens a lot less often than people think. And that's for 2 reasons. One, it might not have even happened at all. Think about how many filters are between you and that information. Your Aunt Debbie shared a post on Facebook with a caption. She didn't read the article. You never clicked on it. You just read her little 2 cents and then the headline, which they're allowed to lie in, on an article that was 4 paragraphs long about a trial that took 2 weeks, written by a person who heard it from a guy who was neither on the scene nor a part of the trial. It's safe to say that you don't have a good understanding of what actually happened in that case. And if it really is a justified case of self-defense, and it's pretty clear that it is, and you do have all the information, those are outliers. That's why you know about them. I've investigated lots of shootings. Every shooter claims it was self-defense, but it's always pretty obvious whether it was or not. You know, store owner, dead guy with a ski mask on, store owner with a bank bag under his hand and a warm 38. It's pretty obvious what happened. Like, it's never that unclear. No one's ever on the fence when we go to a self-defense shooting. In fact, self-defense shootings are like the easiest cases to work. It's almost always pretty obvious. Now, my experience might be a little biased because I policed in the American South. I'll get to that in a little bit. Where you're from matters a lot less than you think. So for every outlier case where the details are not super clear and there's arguments for both sides of whether it was self-defense or not, there are countless cases where the police got to the scene and were like, well, okay then, have a nice night. I've been to a few stabbings that turned out to be self-defense, and they were a little more difficult to figure out, but still relatively pretty easy cases to deal with. Self-defense claims during fistfights are really hard to figure out. That one, I'll give it to the crowd, but we're generally playing at lower stakes when it comes to fistfights. So the I'd rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6 thing, I don't think it very often applies there. But does the good guy ever get charged? Yeah, occasionally even does time. But using those cases to justify the I'd rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6 mentality is like saying you don't wear your seatbelt because you don't want to get trapped underwater. It's like saying you don't want to work out or eat healthy because there are genetic disorders that make it difficult to lose weight. You're using an extremely rare set of circumstances to justify not preparing for a much more likely set of circumstances. It does take time and energy to prepare for this sort of thing, but generally you're hearing this statement from people who spend hours every week on the range or in the dojo or both. And by preparing, in this case, I don't mean doing your own research. This is an area where you should not, I mean, you can do your own research, but don't make any decisions based off of it. Retain a lawyer or sign up for the USCCA. You don't want to go this one alone. Now, if you don't want to spend the time or energy or properly prepare for this sort of thing, that's fine, but don't pretend to be very knowledgeable or passionate about self-defense without understanding the legal ramifications. I'd rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6 is the legal equivalent of I'm not going to learn to grapple because you don't go to the ground in a street fight. It's just ignorant. Typically, when people reduce this decision-making process to being judged by 12 or carried by 6, they will imply or state that self-defense laws are unfair or so complicated that they can't possibly be complied with. When they get challenged on this, they will very often retreat literally to where they're from. They'll say, yeah, right, you don't know what it's like in California. First of all, this is just like whether or not you know how to fight. Where you're from means nothing. The laws are not really that different from state to state. They're just not. Some of the wording and details change, and people are going to obsess over phrases like stand your ground and castle doctrine, which are largely just semantics and don't really affect anything. Ultimately, the standard is reasonable, often described as objectively reasonable. That's the standard for everyone, everywhere, even the police, even people in California, even people in New York, even in the UK where viewers are often comment, self-defense is illegal here, the standard is reasonable. Reasonableness, that's the standard. That's a pretty good one. That's a pretty reasonable one. And these laws don't change much, no matter where you go. Now, you might argue that they are unfairly enforced. Maybe they are. How did you determine that? That brings us back to how we get this information. Did you figure that out from analyzing the case with training and expertise in the field? Did you read it off a Facebook post from your Aunt Debbie? Did you get the version of events from a website? Maybe one with an agenda? Maybe one that is biased towards views that you already have? Don't you hate it when people get their information from websites that are biased against views you already have when it comes to these types of subjects? But that brings us to the number one problem of why we have trouble understanding and interpreting self-defense laws and cases that involve self-defense law. If I told you we gotta blast off in a rocket ship to space and fix a satellite, me and you, you would go, whoa, Mike, I am not qualified to do that. I don't have any training or experience, and I have to go to my regular job tomorrow. Fair enough. If I said, hey, I need to rewire my house, I've got some tools from the dollar store and some YouTube tutorials, you'd be like, Mike, I don't think we can do that. But when we start getting down to things like fighting, maybe people kind of know that training and experience would help with that, but they also sort of feel like they could do it. I feel like I could fight. Everyone that comes in here is like, man, if you gave me 6 months, I think I'd be ready to fight. They're not. Usually they're not. When the thing that we're talking about doing is reading words and understanding them, it's a really hard thing to believe and then admit that you can't do it. That's tough. If you're reading something or someone's saying things to you and you don't actually know what they're saying, you might not even know enough to know what you don't know. That's a huge problem, particularly when we're talking about a thing that people feel like they should know. Laws are really tricky with that because besides a few archaic terms, they generally use simple words that everybody knows, but they have tons of clauses and lots of situations where there's and versus or, and there's lots of like elements that have to be met, and if this, then that sort of things. And if you can't hold all that in your brain while you're reading it, it can get very easy to misinterpret a law. That's why this is one of the areas where you shouldn't do your own research and then make important decisions based on that. It's not a bad thing, like nobody can know everything. It's okay to be ignorant. That's normal. Our natural state is ignorance. So definitely don't go this one alone. Sign up for the USCCA or go retain your own attorney. Consult some form of actual expert. Don't just believe whatever you already believe. That's crazy. Don't form your opinion solely on what some idiot from YouTube has to say. That would be really crazy.